Well, brilliant. Thanks so much, and thank you for having me along this evening. Really nice to be here, and excited to share a few kind of thoughts on UX design. So, yeah, going to be chatting tonight about how we can all be building digital products through better UX design. And I appreciate this is a dev meetup, but UX is often, and for anyone who was listening in the kind of the chat before, it's something that can be done really or can be thought as something that's very siloed and kind of tucked away. A designer does it, it's a bit of wireframing, and it happens at some point in a product design and development process, but it doesn't kind of really concern everyone. Hopefully what you're going to get by the end of this talk is that UX design is much more than just wireframing. It's a much bigger picture than that. So we're going to take a look at that and hopefully just give you some kind of thought-provoking ideas about why UX is important and how you might be able to help and think about that when you're building products as well. So that's the plan. A very quick bit about me and the company I run, which is Unfold. We're a digital agency based here in Bristol. We work with startups and scale-ups to do two things with them really. So UX design or user experience design to help them create products which are really easy for users to understand and bring value to the business. And then we also build websites and digital platforms for the web in PHP, of course, mainly Laravel. And if you are a Laravel developer, we are currently hiring. So we have a tech lead position. I think there's a link at the end of this slide. I hope that's okay for me to plug, but I'll leave it there. But if anyone wants to join us, then please do reach out and have a chat. So what are we going to talk about today? So three things, I guess. UX design, what it is and what it's not, and just a kind of general overview. Why it's important in practice, and I'm going to use a fairly unconventional example. We'll see how that plays out. Yeah, and show how UX is more than just that wireframing process. And then lastly, I'll do a little summary and we'll talk about why that's important and how you can take that away for your product team and use that there. Hopefully that sounds all good. And then, of course, I'm more than happy to take questions at the end as well, or I'm not sure how the Zoom functionality works, but if something pops up, I will endeavour to ask it as we go through, or answer it as we go through. Cool. So what is product design? I think that's a reasonably good place to start. And I guess in its very essence, product design is when one group of humans tries to guess what another group of humans wants from a product or a service. And if we think about it in that way, the success of your business, the product, relies on the process and your ability to guess, or in theory, you use a process to accurately create products which have demand from that other group. And that process is integral to the success of the product. So as I was saying, when we think about product design, often we think about these kind of things. So sketching out screens, or maybe wireframing, or even creating MVPs and developing prototypes. And that can often be thought about as UX design. And we see that a lot with clients when they come to us. It's like, can you do the UX? And what they mean is, can you wireframe a product for us? But actually, it's a much broader set of disciplines, and that's really what I want. If you take nothing away from this talk other than that, it's that UX design is about much more than just these things you see on the screen, wireframing and developing products. Why is that the case? Well, it all started with this guy, Don Norman. I think he's got an excellent choice in hats, but that's probably slightly questionable. he was the first person to ever have user experience design in his job title when he started working at Apple in 1995. And he actually coined the phrase UX design when he joined, because he wanted something that was wider in scope than just interface or usability design. Apple were already very good, and they always have been very good at creating kind of good interfaces, but what they didn't have at the time was a cohesive, integrated set of experiences. So right from pre-purchase through to end of life, thinking about the experience of using a product, and kind of, I guess, regardless of your opinion on Apple's ability to innovate now, they are very good at creating cohesive experiences across a lot of different touch points. And that is really UX design kind of coming through. I think my favorite example of that is if you think about a long time ago, if you're getting an MP3 player shipped, it might, when it arrived in the post, it might not actually have battery charge already. So someone like Don Norman has noticed that actually there's a really not pleasant experience there when my product arrives, and instead, actually, if you shipped the device with battery charge already, it's like instant joy when you open it, and that whole experience ties in to a much greater part of how I, as a user, experience using that product, way beyond just the UX in terms of the interface. So that's really the first point, and that user experience is much more than just that interface. It's customer support, it's brand, it's performance, it's graphic design, it's marketing. It's a huge array of different things all working together and all pointing in the direction of the user. So all those departments are asking, how can I provide a better experience for the end user? And when you get all those things pointing in the right direction, you start to create something that's much greater than the sum of its parts. And that's incredibly important if you want to create products which people love, in the same way that Apple has that kind of cult following. So that's all well and good. But you're kind of asking, why is this important, and why does this matter to me as someone who builds products? Why do I need to think about the big picture if it's my responsibility to just, build products and put stuff together? Well, I'm going to use an example, and you'd find that UX design was particularly important if you were in Hawaii on Saturday, January the 13th, 2018 at 8:07 a.m., very specific. And the reason you would find that incredibly important is because every single citizen in the state of Hawaii, that's 1.5 million people, was sent this message. Emergency alert, ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii. Seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. Okay, I don't know if anyone kind of remembers the news story around this, but this genuinely did happen. And this was quite sort of humorous in hindsight, but actually telling 1.5 million people they've got minutes to live, not great. What happened? I mean, it was actually, there's some really quite scary videos on the internet in terms of this guy's being put into a manhole cover, like genuinely very dangerous things to be doing, but terrifying. That you've just received this message. It's on all the notice boards, etc. So naturally, there was an inquiry, and research was carried out in the kind of wake of this error. And I was fascinated. What's caused this? Was it a computer glitch? Has someone hacked into the system? But no, it was actually put down as human error, which is interesting. So user error. So dug a little bit deeper, and I found this in one of the reports. It said, the user selected missile alert instead of test missile alert from a drop-down menu in the agency's alert system software. A drop-down menu. So the UX designer inside of me is now slightly concerned, because we're in this situation where we're testing nuclear war, or are we actually doing nuclear war? And we've always a drop-down. You could just tab, that can go very easily wrong. And there's clearly been an oversight in terms of UX design, and the person who's ultimately come down to deciding what input to use on one form field in an entire application has had huge knock-on effects, in this case for an entire state. So UX design, very important. So what I'm going to do now is show you a little bit about our UX design process, how we'd approach this, and just some general sort of thinkings on that, so that hopefully we can all prevent future accidental missile crises, or indeed just products that work really well for users. So this is how we do things at Unfold. This isn't going to be, wildly different from any product design or development process that you've seen before or that you've worked with. But I'll just run through it really high level, and then we're going to go through each step and hopefully redesign this agency software and improve things and see how UX can help us in that sense. So the first part is always to start with kind of understanding the problem right at the top there. So setting metrics for success. So what's the problem we're facing? Accidental kind of use of our software. What are the metrics we're going to use to track that? Well, not setting off missile alerts. Ideation, we do a lot of kind of brainstorming activities, and at Unfold we do this with designers, developers, everyone gets involved in terms of what solutions can we use to overcome the challenge that's been presented to us. Wireframing and user testing. So yeah, that is a really important part of UX. It does form a lot of it, but we do that very iteratively. So how can we come up with different ideas, test them very quickly with users, crucially, with actual users, not just, yeah, that looks good, we think it works. UI design, bringing that brand look and feel in, developing really high performing and scalable products, and then analyzing that to work out if it's had the intended effects that we wanted. And through that process, we can start to improve products to avoid mishaps, or in more kind of commercial cases, improve conversions or signups, or whatever it is your business or organization objective is. Running through this process allows you to get there quicker with less mistakes. So let's give this a go. First up, understand and define success. So I couldn't actually find any screenshots of the actual agency software. So I've had to use a little bit of creative license, but bear with me. But obviously based on what I've read from the reports, etc., this is essentially what it looked like. What kind of notifications you want to send: missile alert, test, volcano alert, missile alert, test alert, volcano. However, they're all kind of in a drop down, and you pick from one of those. So what's wrong with this? Well, I mean, they're all quite similar. So very easy to pick the wrong one. We could accidentally tab or, the arrow button and then click send. There's no way to undo this. So in the real scenario, it took them 48 minutes to get the actual news that it was a mistake and that it wasn't a real threat out to the public. So 48 minutes is a very long time. There was no process in place for going back and being like, actually, no, that was a mistake, sorry. So a couple of things wrong there. But I think, again, thinking about what we were saying earlier in the talk about UX being much more than just the interface, if I gave this to everyone who's attended this talk tonight, we've got 25 people, and I tell you to send a missile test alert, and that the ramifications of sending a live one are that you're going to terrify 1.5 million people, you're going to get it right. All of you will have 100% accuracy because you understand the consequences. And that's fair enough, okay. But UX is about the user and it's about the big picture. So we actually need to go and find where that software is being used in order to understand the context of the software that we're creating and how it's being used in practice. So let's try that. This is a photo of the kind of like ops room from where the software is used. And like, holy moly, like there's a lot going on there. So I don't know, let's call him Andy on the left. Andy is responsible for testing the codes for the nuclear codes, well, not the nuclear codes, the test missile alert every time he comes on shift. And he does that as a routine. So it's monotonous. So that's the first kind of thing to realize. He does this repetitively. And look how many things are kind of vying for his attention as well. So we've got 4 screens, 3 phones. Is that 4 phones? Timers. We've got his mate there who's probably chatting about a barbecue he's having next weekend. Remember, it's Saturday morning at 8 o'clock. So pretty good chance Andy had some beers last night. Maybe he's a little bit tired. All like real world scenarios, which now when we kind of put that drop down into context, actually making that mistake seems like if you do it enough times, it's almost an inevitability. So that's really important to kind of consider that actually there's a real life context to the software I'm using or building. And I need to be mindful of that when I'm creating things that are going to be used in the real world. So, okay, fair enough. We've kind of seen this in the real world. Let's take that insight and try and come up with the next stage, which is ideation and wireframing. So maybe if this was in real life, we could do this a bit more collaboratively, but I've just come up with some ideas about how I might approach reworking this based on the insight that we've just been given. So we could split out the notification into 2 parts. So less decision making, make it more isolated so that Andy doesn't have to make 2 decisions in one go. Just needs to choose the type of notification he wants to send, and then he can work out whether he wants to send a test or a live alert to the entirety of Hawaii. And also just like refreshing his mind there in terms of you selected missile alert, so you can see at all stages where he is in his process. Also a little review screen, so we could add a bit of friction into the process. Often with UX, we're trying to reduce friction, trying to remove things that are going to be barriers for people signing up. But in this case, actually, we're looking to introduce friction because I don't want Andy to be able to send a test missile alert or a real missile alert accidentally. So we could add this sort of, you need to type not a test in order to really get him cognitively out of that, oh, I'm mundane, I need to actually engage my brain before I do this. And that helps to break that repetitiveness. And then equally, that 48 minutes, we could bring that down to 1 if he does manage to somehow get through this process, if we have an undo process in place already. So there's a automated, actually, guys, sorry, we've messed this up. There's nothing to worry about. So those are just ideas, and they're not necessarily going to be guaranteed fixes. But what we have to do now is actually go back and user test that with Andy. So is the assumptions that I've made working in my quiet, serene studio going to play out in the real world when we've got all these distractions, all these screens, all these telephones saying, I want your attention. So we have to try that. And there's no way of knowing until we go back and try these things, whether that's going to fix the problem that we want. But equally, we've got to check that we don't introduce some issues as well. So I've added quite a lot of friction and a lot of steps there. Does that mean that now by the time Andy's sent the notification, actually Hawaii has already been vaporized? Like, have I given them too long to be able to get that notification out? But that's why we have to test things, and why it's so vital to test out different interfaces, different experiences, and see how those translate into the real world. Step 5 would be the UI design. So probably less important to bring brand and character into a product that's being used in an agency. Actually, this is going to be all about function and making sure it works correctly. But equally, we can use things like color to help guide the user. So for instance, we could make the live Hawaii alert red to make it look like the danger area. Just give those small little prompts and affordances about how things will work, will help to avoid those kind of errors. Equally though, accessibility, we don't want to be using color to be the only way of recognizing that that's an issue, because someone might be colorblind, and we need to kind of bear that in mind. Step 6 was development. So that's everyone's expertise here. So I won't wax lyrical about that, but you know, it's still got to be performant. If there's a really long load time between each screen, again, that could impact the likelihood that Andy then gets distracted, the phone rings, he gets lost in terms of the process that he's in, and then might send the wrong test alert as well. So, you know, performance really important to both UX as well, and we know that from kind of booking applications and stuff as well. Super important that applications perform quickly and users don't drop off. So lots to be said for that as well, and a very important part of the process. And lastly then, but not least, at the end of that process, we have to be able to review the metrics. So did we cause less alerts, and how have we tested that? This is obviously a very difficult one to do because maybe we need to test it in a very high stress scenario, because like we said at the beginning, if I give that drop down to all of you, you're probably going to get it right. So how are we going to create an environment that stresses whether this can be done in that kind of replicating that Saturday morning scenario to ensure that we don't send out the wrong alert, reviewing those metrics, and then going back to the beginning of this process and understanding again where we go next in terms of building out a better experience for our users. So it's very cyclical, and it's about constant improvement and working quickly to get feedback from users so that we can get that into products and learn as we go. Really, really important. So hopefully that's solved our accidental nuclear war. And why is that important to all of us sitting in product teams? Well, I guess three reasons I would summarize with. Firstly, you build the right thing when you do good UX design. You learn and validate your ideas before you start developing them. There's nothing more frustrating, I'm sure you'll all agree, than a change in requirements or a U-turn on scope. It's costly, it's frustrating, and when you do UX properly, you can help to reduce that. So you hit the mark more often, you understand what your users want, and it gives you more confidence when you are building out products that you're heading in the right direction, not necessarily building stuff to find out if it works. You build the thing right, so you don't use a drop down where you should be using a radio button or something else. It gives you the opportunity to test out these things first and create really easy to use and easy to understand interfaces and products and experiences as a whole, because you understand the context that they're going to be used in. And then lastly, but not least, if you get both of those two things right, you build the right thing and you build the thing right, you improve metrics. And that's really where everyone in the business or organization wins, because you drastically see the changes in performance, which is ultimately the goal of building a product or service. We've seen that time and time again for our clients. The process works really reliably. And it's all about just getting people concerned about the user and focusing in on that. So I think on that note, I've kind of flown through that, but hopefully that's given some insight into UX design, why it's a bigger picture, and hopefully why it's important and how everyone can kind of get involved. I will say thank you very much. Like I say, we've got a tech lead role for PHP Laravel, so if you're interested in working with us and building some very UX focused web apps, let me know. I think we've got also a junior front end dev role if you know anyone But yeah, that's me. Thank you very much for listening. I'm obviously happy to take questions, etc., or just general chat. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that, Harry. So if anyone does have questions, you just pop them in the Q&A button on the bottom of the window on Zoom. You pop your questions in there, or just drop them into the chat channel, remembering to put your message to all participants, so they can see them. So I do have a question, and it's well, first of all, thanks for that really interesting talk. Actually, I love that example of the,
yeah, that was incredible. I loved it. Brilliant example.
Yeah. I mean, actually, I work on a system which sends text messages, and the prospect of trying to send 1.5 million text messages, that just seems, it's incredible that their network actually can send that money so quickly. So there we go. But yeah, it's kind of like UX, where UX and security meet each other, and the example you might have heard of it recently in the news was the NHS site for booking your vaccinations. So on the one hand, and I think they have made it pretty easy, if you want to book a vaccine and you're in a group that's allowed to, you can just type in your date of birth and your name, your date of birth, and your postcode. Well, originally they were asking for an NHS number, but loads of people don't know their NHS number. So then they said, all right, well, if you don't know your NHS number, you can just provide your date of birth and the postcode that you're registered at with your GP. So that's pretty much your postcode in most people's cases. So that made it super easy for people to book jabs. But then somebody realized, actually, if I want to see the status of somebody, because it gave a different message. So if you log in and you've never booked a vaccination and you're allowed to, it says, please book your first vaccination. If you've already had a vaccination, it says, this is your second vaccination, or please book your second vaccination. And then I think if you had both, it says you've already had your vaccinations. So there is some data leakage there, which some people worry about. But then when you're designing UX, I mean, what would you do in a situation like that? You want to make it as easy as possible for people to book their vaccinations, but also perhaps you don't want to give away, who's intelligent and decided to book their vaccination, who believes silly anti-vaccine rubbish, I mean.
It's a great question. I'm probably not going to be able to try and solve the data leakage issue, but what I would say is that UX is really about getting all the departments in an organization focused around what does the user need. So we've definitely seen examples where we wanted to do something, and often this is like fintech, particularly. You want to do something, and then you send it to the legal bods, and they're like, absolutely not. There's no way you're doing that. It needs to say this, 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 and this, and it's like, no one's going to understand that. Yeah. And that's immensely frustrating. But what we have seen is that in those scenarios, you've got to get users, and it can be really small, it just be snippets of user interviews or user recordings in front of those people, and actually suddenly then they get it. It's like, oh right, we can't write it that way because clearly, look, this customer doesn't understand. And it's almost as if like showing them the actual customer struggling with it, whether that's a Hotjar recording or an interview, it sort of clicks, and that helps to align things like security issues. It's like, okay, where do we meet in the middle to solve those issues, and getting, as long as the two departments are working towards, okay, how do we create the best experience? That's the way to kind of preserve UX in that scenario. Whether they've got that right in the NHS in terms of the data leakage there is perhaps a different debate. But that can be quite a useful kind of technique for overcoming those issues, often when you've got different departments pulling in different directions.
Okay, thank you. So we've got a couple of questions from the floor. Dan asks, UX problems are obvious in retrospect. How do you find them before they become a problem?
Yes, good question. I mean, you'll never find everything, I guess is the honest answer. But the trick is, as with any kind of product development process, is all about time to learning. So trying to fail fast or learn quickly. So trying to ship in smaller increments, and we do that at the design stage as well. So we'll share designs with stakeholders, we'll share them with customers, to try and get that feedback as early as possible in the process, to just try and minimize the number of things that appear later down the funnel. So yeah, always trying to work out when you're trying to test something, if it's a new feature or whether it's whatever it is, it's like, how do we shorten the amount of time between now and learning whether a customer is going to like this or it's going to work well in terms of UX. And that can be, that means starting with sketches. It then means working in really low fidelity wireframes, then working up to prototypes and UI designs in Sketch, Figma, then prototyping in development, and then kind of going to production. So if you can do it all those stages, the less stuff ends up actually out there in the wild when it's much harder to manage and deal with.
Okay. So Dan, if you've got any follow-up questions, just pop them in the QA or in the chat. So thank you very much for that. Robin asks, what exactly is wireframing? I heard it's cited all the time, but never properly defined.
Yeah, that's, yeah, sorry, I probably should have kind of called that out really. So I guess, as I was saying, for me, there are kind of 4 key stages of designing a product. So we would start with ideas and just sketching screens. So that is, I guess, in an essence, like, wireframing probably doesn't have a very specific definition, which is why it's not been cited as a proper term. But that's where you're starting that process. You're drawing things out and just very loosely trying to get ideas into something tangible. There's something that happens between an idea and committing it to a drawing that is a bit magic. There's a bit of critical thinking that has to occur when you actually transfer that onto a page. It becomes a bit more tangible, it becomes a bit more real. And that's the first phase of wireframing. Really what I'm talking about when it's wireframing is then when I would move that into some design software, working in very low fidelity, so grayscale, very rogue components, whether that's an XD, whether that's something like Balsamic, where it's just sort of, here's a button, an image will go here, text will go here, will really kind of allow you to explore ideas, but in a very quick, easy way. Yeah, I can also send around after this, and I'm not sure how we can maybe do an email, I'll drop it on the Slack channel, a kind of our prototyping guide, which I think has a wireframing kit in it as well. So you can have a play around with some free, I think it's in Adobe XD, so it's free to download and use, and you can just play around with creating either websites or apps just in a kind of safe space, very quickly test ideas without kind of fully committing to designing that up.
Well, if you've got a link to that, we can tweet that out.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll get that sorted for you.
Thank you. And I expect it kind of comes on to another couple of questions kind of along this line. Daniel asks, what are the best UX testing tools you've come across?
So we would always use a combination of qual and quant kind of insights, because you just can't use them one or the other. The data, Google Analytics, Hotjar. So Google Analytics obviously is just kind of reporting. Hotjar is a session recording tool. So it allows you to see in kind of a video of someone using your website and going through the flow, where they click, where their mouse goes. You can do heat maps, scroll maps, And that can be incredibly useful to provide data on where people are going wrong. So, if you're in Google Analytics and you can see that the third page in your booking funnel where you ask someone to sign up is where all the drop-off is, great, we've got a problem, but we don't know what that problem necessarily is. So we use the data to kind of hone in on where the issue is. And then we would try and use some kind of qualitative. So whether that's customer interviews, maybe a survey, you can run like surveys live on the website. So if someone shows exit intent, you can serve them a pop-up and be like, why have we not been able to help you today? To try and provide the insight, which then tells you why that page isn't performing if it's not immediately obvious from the data or the session cams. And then we use those two things in tandem to sort of draw insight and then do a change, push that up and see whether that impacts the effects. So Google Analytics, Hotjar for session recording, and then sometimes online surveys and speaking to customers in real life.
And sorry, when you say session recording, what do you mean there?
So Hotjar's like, it basically you put a tag on the site and you can literally watch someone go through your site. So it records the sessions, literally, like you can see someone's mouse. You go onto the Hotjar platform, press play on session 1, and you can see user 1 going to home, clicking shop, going through the shop and going, oh, I want to buy product X. They click on that. And then you can see them at a checkout. You can't see the details, it's all anonymized that they're putting in, but you can see if they get specifically stuck on a part of a form. So it can be really helpful if you know the checkout page is a problem, but then you can see people on the Hotjar recordings really struggling with that drop down that you ask for marketing purposes. And you're like, oh no, that's right, that's why we've lost 10 people this month. Let's remove that, and then those people will become customers. So I mean, there's definitely some privacy kind of questions that you'd raise around that, but it's very widely used by every startup I know because it's such a valuable insight.
Is that a Hotjar recording of the sending the missile alert to everyone?
Yeah, I would like to see that.
Brilliant. So thanks for that. And Daniel, if you've got any more you want to ask on that, just either do another QA or drop it in chat. So Kelly asks, while we're talking about tools for wireframes, Kelly asks, what is your process for B2B testing with wireframes? More specific, how do you find B2B users to test in early stages?
Yes, really, really hard. For the kind of reason that obviously they're not widespread. It might be that you have to speak to you've got to obviously utilize a network in terms of how do I get in front of the people that are going to be relevant. So it's really important when you're doing user testing, of course, that you're not testing it with your mum, because your mum's not the user of that B2B product and she's going to give you great feedback. So it needs to be that, like, from a relevant kind of user group. If you can utilize network contacts or potentially partners that you're going to be working with, if they're really receptive to your proposition and your idea, it's almost a vested interest for them to be feeding back into the product very early because they want to use it and they want it to be a success. So there's opportunities to do focus groups or one-on-one interviews where you put wireframes in front of those teams and allow them to give feedback, walk them through that wireframe, or if it's kind of prototyped, let them explore it and get them to talk you through it. So that's option 1. Option 2 is that you can use, there are specific agencies, there's some really good ones in Bristol, the name of which escapes me, sorry, but I can dig it out. And they specialize in recruitment of user participants. So if you say, I'm a B2B in fintech and I want to speak to this person, this person, this person, or this job type, they will then go and find those people for a fee. Obviously, that's quite an expensive way of doing things. But if you're working in enterprise and that, you've got those kind of budgets, that's a very effective way of finding those people as well.
Cool, thank you. And Kelly, if you've got any follow-up on that, just pop another question in the Q&A or add something into chat. So another one from Dan. How do you stop UX degrading over time? It's easy when stuff is new to design it to be clean and have good UX, but then little changes accumulate over time, and each of those changes can degrade UX slightly. How do you prevent the UX rot?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and is actually another talk. But it comes back to simplicity, and simplicity is such a disruptive strategy for startups, because, like you say, you build a web app or you build a product, and it's like, we need to add this feature and we need to add this feature, and slowly but surely you get this huge app which is just full of almost confusing features. And the issue then, as you say, is the UX just rots, because users go onto a product, and I'm sure we've all had this experience, and there's just so much going on. You don't really know where to start. You need to think of it in the sense that anything that's there that's not adding value is just confusing people, and it's actually putting them off your product. So more features, or like there's this sort of myth that more features is a good thing. Actually, less features, more quality of the features that you need is the goal. And one of our great challenges as an agency is selling that idea into the company. So how do we get away from let's build loads of stuff and let's do one thing really, really well? And the way we try to do that is by being really clear about two things. One, who is the user that we're trying to design for? So having a very clear, this is the person and this is the target market that we're going after, no one else. Because if we design a product that's kind of good for everyone, it will be perfect for no one. So we've got to decide who we're going to design for, and we're just going to make it perfect for them. And you've got to get everyone to buy into that. Again, talking about like getting everyone aligned around the user. That's kind of starts with who is the user. And then the second thing is our product is going to do one thing and one thing really well. And becoming fixated about that as a kind of North Star for the product team is really important. Getting, again, buy-in from everyone that this is the person we're building for, and this is the one problem we solve for them. And every great product kind of has that, and you can tell what that is very easily. And when it degrades over time, that's when you start to struggle with getting kind of that simplicity, and it starts to degrade. So yeah, trying to maintain that over time, really, really difficult. But if you can stay focused on those two things, who am I designing for and what's the one problem we solve, and then evaluate features on the back of that, then you will be more likely to hit the mark. And then not being afraid to kill features which are not perfect for your end user. And that can be painful, because people can be using those, like a subset of your users cannot be using that feature, and you don't want to kill that. But if it doesn't fit the vision, it doesn't fit that kind of North Star, this is the problem, long term it's going to hurt you. So I would recommend, obviously context dependent, but making hard decisions.
Okay, thank you very much. So Robin's asked, is the UX user testing company People for Research?
It is.
That's it.
Yeah, they're really nice. Yeah, would highly recommend.
Fantastic. So we've got a few things popped up in the chat. Let me just see if there are questions. No, I think everyone is applauding.
Thank you.